How much better would your life be if you could overcome procrastination? If procrastination lives inside you, it's like a tenant in reverse. It charges you instead of paying you. And procrastination charges you dearly. And you know this very well. If you stop to observe, there are two types of procrastination. Either you can't start something you know you need to do, or you've already started but can't maintain consistency in this new habit in your life. In both cases, for most people, the problem is that you know very well what needs to be done, but you can't do it or can't follow through. So today I want to be very practical here. Number 2, I'm going to present a cure for procrastination validated by current science. But I already warn you, this cure isn't what you'd like to hear. Number 3 and number 4, I'm going to tell you what you can do to overcome procrastination and take control of your life once and for all. For this, I'm going to use scientific knowledge, specifically the sciences that study the relationships between the brain, mind, and behavior of human beings. And if you stay with me here until the end of this video, you'll have much more clarity about how your brain works and what you can do to destroy procrastination before it destroys your life. Recently, I simply gave up trying to help a great friend of mine. He's a dear friend, a guy I've known for many years. And since I've known him, he doesn't like the life he has. He's a very intelligent, very enlightened guy. This friend of mine has incredible ideas, very interesting projects for his life, but he can't get any of it off paper. He's a great professional, but he doesn't chase after his own career and ends up stagnating. He knows the potential he has, but he can't bring this potential to the surface. It happens that it's not for lack of knowledge. He has all the necessary knowledge to change his own life. He knows what the problem is. He knows how to change this problem. I've already tried to help this guy in every way you can imagine. I gave professional opportunities. I advised. I recommended professional help. Sometimes he even starts to change, and his life naturally begins to improve, but then he can't follow through. He lacks consistency, and he goes back to being the way he was before. And recently, I gave up helping this guy. He continues to be my great friend. Nothing changed in that regard. But I realized something about this friend of mine. He knows what the cure for procrastination is, but he doesn't want to hear it. He doesn't want to accept it. And it's this cure for procrastination that I want to teach you here today. But you might ask me, gosh, Pedro, but why did you give up helping this guy? It's because this friend of mine has a characteristic. He has something in him, a way, a problem that most procrastinating people have, but they don't realize it. And while you don't face this problem, no tool will cure your procrastination. And what is this problem that prevents procrastination from leaving your life? To understand this problem, we need to understand how the human brain works. Everyone, me and you and everyone you know, everyone has ups and downs in life. You've certainly had days when you woke up well, you were excited, full of energy, full of desire, enthusiasm to do things. On those days, you chased after your goals. You did what had to be done. You overcame procrastination. But you know, those days aren't eternal. You've certainly also gone through a period in your life when you simply had no spirit, energy, desire, motivation to do anything. In those moments, the goals you have for your life seem like real mountains, and you simply can't find energy within yourself to climb those mountains. And what many people want in those moments is to eliminate those lows. There are many people who want to constantly live on the high. Whenever I open the question box in the stories of that neighboring social network, dozens of people appear asking me, "Professor Pedro, how do I stay motivated all the time? How do I stay energized, excited all the time?" And I don't even blame these people for wanting that. After all, we live in an edited world. Social networks keep showing us edited lives. You open social media and there's perfection. Perfect bodies, perfect lives, perfectly motivated people every day. People who always have energy to do things. People who every day are happy going to the gym, eating salad with chicken breast that looks like a shoe sole, and the person loves all of it. The person is perfectly excited about life and work and studies all the time. Perfect careers, success everywhere. It's hard not to feel bad when you open your phone and everything you see is better than you. And then people want this perfection. I want to stop procrastinating. I want to stay motivated and excited all the time, like the people I follow on social media. But it turns out that's not how the human brain works. Nobody posts on social media when they had diarrhea because they ate spoiled chickpeas. Nobody posts funerals on social media. So be careful not to measure the value of your life based on what you see on your phone. Social media is incredible for learning, for having fun, but be careful because they're also showcases of false perfection, showcases of constant success, motivation, constant excitement. But real life, flesh and blood life, is much more composed of failures, pain, difficulties than successes. But failure stays hidden and nobody sees it. This false perfection of social media is literally making many people sick. And as a friend of mine says, do you know what the opposite of being perfect is? It's being human, and there's nothing more beautiful than that. So, let me tell you how your brain works. It's impossible. It's literally impossible to remain on top all the time. It's impossible to remain motivated, excited, full of energy and spirit, to do things all the time. It's impossible to maintain a constant state of very high energy. The problem is that there are people who want this so much that the person ends up trying to force it. The person drinks liters of coffee or uses even stronger substances, all to try to stay connected, euphoric, excited, full of energy, full of desire to do things all the time. But then comes a very important principle of how your brain works. Who governs your motivation? Your desire to do things is a system in your brain called the reward system. And one of the most important brain circuits of this system is called corticomesolimbic dopaminergic pathways. This is a complicated name, I know, and you don't need to memorize it. But I say it because I know some of you like to know these neuroscientific details. As the name itself says, this system in your brain involves a chemical substance. It's a neuromodulator called dopamine. When this dopaminergic system is activated, you feel the desire to do things, the will to chase after your objectives. You feel energy and spirit to do things and chase after goals. Whenever we talk about dopamine, many people immediately think of pleasure. But dopamine is involved in a specific component of pleasure, which is the drive and energy, the motivation for you to seek things. If I block the dopamine receptors in your brain and give you chocolate, you'll find the chocolate tasty. That is, you feel that satisfaction, that pleasant sensation of chocolate. And this satisfaction is a component of what we call pleasure. You feel this even if I block the dopamine receptors in your brain. But if I do this, you won't get up and get dressed, go down the elevator, and go to the bakery to buy chocolate. This means that if I block the dopamine receptors in your brain, you won't chase after what you want anymore, including what is pleasurable, including your life goals and objectives. You know when you're feeling good, wanting to do things, wanting to chase after your projects. It's because this dopaminergic system of yours is active. With a good level of activation, you know when you're without energy, without spirit, without desire to do anything, without desire to do even what you know needs to be done. It's because your dopaminergic system is hypoactive. That is, with a low level of activation. Dopamine does many other things besides this, okay? But this is one of its main functions, activating the system in your brain that makes you feel energy and spirit to do things. Well, your brain releases dopamine in two different ways. We have tonic release and phasic release of dopamine. Let's talk here first about tonic release. Essentially, you have a baseline level, a basal level. It's a constant level of dopamine that's released in your brain. We call this tonic release of dopamine. But there's also another way your brain releases dopamine. We call it phasic release of dopamine. This release involves dopamine spikes beyond that constant baseline level that's being released inside you all the time. And here's where the danger lies. These dopamine spikes are usually associated with that euphoria, that very strong excitement you feel. It's very pleasant to feel excited, engaged like that, full of energy to do things. And as I said, many people want to remain like that, up high, all the time. The problem is that when you have a very high spike of phasic dopamine release, your brain will self-regulate. This spike usually ends quickly, and when it ends, do you know what happens to that average level, that constant level of dopamine? It drops below the previous average. That is, when you have very intense dopamine spikes, these spikes end quickly. Your brain cleans up this dopamine very quickly. And when this spike ends, it's not that you return to that previous average, that baseline average you were at before. No. What happens is that your dopamine levels return below the baseline average. They bring down the baseline average. Let me give you a practical example, and you'll understand this quickly with ease. Drinking coffee. The caffeine contained in coffee is a psychoactive stimulant. This is a complicated and technical name, but it means that caffeine is a drug. And this drug, called caffeine, is dopaminergic. It activates the dopaminergic system I'm talking about here. That's why when you drink a lot of coffee or energy drinks, which also contain caffeine, you have a spike of euphoria. And right after comes what we call a crash, an English word after the euphoria spike. Your mood is brought down and you become dragged, discouraged, without energy, without desire to do anything. You become worse than before taking the coffee or energy drink, because your basal levels, your constant levels of dopamine, the tonic release of dopamine, which you already understand, falls below the average from before the spike. And then, what do? You go there and have another coffee or another energy drink. But then I ask you, does this second coffee or energy drink have the same effect as the first? And you know it doesn't. The second coffee or energy drink has a lesser effect. The energy, spike seems to be smaller than the first coffee or energy drink of the day. Why? Here we have another characteristic of how your brain's dopaminergic system works. The effect of dopamine in your brain doesn't just depend on the spikes. It depends on the difference between the current spike and what came before. That is, when you have a dopamine spike, but shortly before you had another equal spike. This new spike won't give you the same satisfaction. That's why the second coffee doesn't have the same effect as the first. And the third coffee doesn't have the same effect as the second. And this applies to energy drinks too. Coffee can be a great ally for your focus, productivity, and motivation, but it needs to be used the right way. But that's a topic for another video. Actually, I could talk much more about dopamine too. I gave a good simplification here in a somewhat crude way. The dopaminergic system is much more complicated and sophisticated than what I explained to you here. But that's because this isn't the focus of the video. So I gave a summary to make your understanding easier. But if you want a video about how to drink coffee the right way to enhance your brain and health, or a video about dopamine and how to maximize your brain's dopaminergic system so you have more focus, more energy, and more satisfaction with your life, or both videos, anyway, if you think it's cool, leave a comment down there in the comments. If enough people comment, we'll make those videos in the future. But today's video topic here is procrastination. What the hell does all this have to do with procrastination? You must be wondering. Well, if you haven't realized yet, it has everything to do with it. First, because now you already know it's impossible to remain euphoric, full of energy and desire to do things all the time in excitement. Nowadays, what people call motivation is actually euphoria. It's excitement. So be careful with this constant perfection of social media. Nobody stays motivated, euphoric like that all the time. This is impossible. But here we have another problem. Our current world is very good at offering you what we call superstimuli or hyperstimuli in science. These are stimuli that produce large dopamine spikes in your brain. Let me give you another concrete example here. It's the consumption of porn. And I need to pause because if YouTube detects this word, it takes down our video. No graphy.well. Why do we chase after stimuli of a sexual nature? It's because these stimuli culminate in the pleasure of the act, which culminates in orgasm. So see that there's an incentive within your brain for you to seek this type of stimulus, for you to chase after this type of stimulus. And as you already know, who governs your desire to chase after things is the corticomesolimbic dopaminergic system. But what would be a stimulus of a sexual nature? Well, it could be seeing a person you find attractive. That's a stimulus. It could be the touch, the caress of your wife or husband, girlfriend, boyfriend, anyway. Or it could be an adult film you watch on the internet. But these adult films you watch on the internet aren't simple, natural stimuli. They are what science calls hyperstimuli or superstimuli. They are artificially constructed to maximize your desire and pleasure. They are artificially constructed to hijack your brain's reward system, the motivation and pleasure system. Another example of hyperstimuli are industrialized foods, processed to maximize your desire and pleasure with food. Look, try to imagine a fruit in nature that's very sweet, that has a lot of fructose, which is fruit sugar. Mango and banana are two good examples. What's the fat content in fruits that have a lot of fructose, a lot of sugar? It's low. It's quite low. Mango, banana, and other very sweet fruits have a low fat content. Now imagine a fatty fruit, very fatty, and avocado is an excellent example. What's the fructose content, the sugar content of avocado? It's low. It's quite a low content. I gave the example of fruits, but this applies generally to nature. Usually, you don't find sugar and fat mixed in nature, but then humans come along in their genius and artificially mix the two. Practically every dessert you love is a mixture of sugar and fat. Brigadeiro, cheesecake, chocolate, ice cream, filled cookies, anyway. But besides mixing sugar and fat into something that doesn't exist in nature, the food industry goes further. It processes foods and puts a bunch of chemical additives to make this even more pleasurable and to further increase your desire for it. But nature is wise. Everything in our body tends toward balance, a biological balance we call homeostasis. When you start consuming hyperstimuli very frequently, your brain will but it's not the same self-regulation I already explained here before. Here we have another type of self-regulation. When you spend days and days consuming hyperstimuli, your brain starts to reduce the number of dopamine receptors. And it's not just dopamine, okay? But also other substances from the reward system, like endorphins, for dopamine to work, or for endorphins, anyway. For these substances to work in brain circuits, they need to find receptors. It's as if dopamine were the key, and the receptor were the lock. Without the lock, dopamine doesn't work. It doesn't activate the dopaminergic system. And here's the X of the matter. When you live consuming hyperstimuli, these hyperstimuli generate frequent dopamine spikes in your brain. This will bring down your basal dopamine level, as I explained to you before, and will leave you unmotivated, without energy, without spirit, and so on. But if you do this for many days, or many weeks, or many months, then things get worse, because your brain reduces the number of dopamine receptors and other substances associated with motivation and pleasure. That is, the same dopamine spike is no longer able to energize you because now your brain has fewer locks for dopamine to enter. And the consequence of this is that desensitization of the brain's reward system occurs. You simply can't feel engaged, energized, motivated, desirous anymore. Anyway, you can't have the desire to do everyday things anymore, to chase after things. For example, when you consume a lot of pornography, this desensitizes your brain to natural, healthy, normal stimuli. You can't have desire for your wife, husband, boyfriend, girlfriend anymore. You can't have desire for a normal and healthy relationship anymore. Your brain is adapted to those extremes, those hyperstimuli you consume in adult videos on the internet. And that's why it's increasingly happening that young people, I'm talking about young people of 18, 20, 25 years old. It's increasingly happening that young people seek doctors with complaints of impotence. And we know this impotence is associated with excessive consumption of porn. Another pause, no GRAPHY. Stop and think about this. A 25-year-old young person with impotence. This makes no sense at all. This doesn't make sense. But what happens is that this young person adapted his brain to the hyperstimuli of adult internet films. He desensitized He made his brain insensitive to real, natural, everyday stimuli. These films are usually completely artificial and fantastical constructions. It's quite unlikely you'll find what you see in the film in real life, unless you hire actors or actresses to make a film with you. And then, the young person whose brain is used to, adapted to this, simply can't feel desire before a real girl in a real, healthy, normal relationship. And then, he literally fails to perform. This is a brain with a dysregulated and insensitive dopaminergic system. And not just dopaminergic, but also indopioid, among others. Anyway, a reward, motivation, and pleasure system that's dysregulated and insensitive. The same applies to eating. When you adapt your brain to hyperstimuli from processed food, junk food, fast food, desserts, and so on, you desensitize your brain. You make your brain insensitive to healthy foods, natural foods, that is. Whoever lives eating pizza and chocolate and brigadeiro simply loses the ability to feel pleasure with vegetables, salads, and a grilled fish fillet. I don't know. And all this I'm telling you here is much more serious when the brain is still developing. That's why putting a tablet or cell phone in your 2-year-old child's hands is very harmful to his brain. That's why developmental psychologists and child and adolescent psychiatrists have been talking so much about not doing this. That's hyperstimulus. They're very intense visual stimuli, created to catch the human brain's attention, created to constantly motivate with spikes. That's so motivating, but so motivating that your child's brain will adapt, but it's still developing. And then, soon, he can't have motivation to study, to play, and so on. And here we touch on a neuralgic point. Do you know this word? Neuralgic. Neuralgic is what relates to nerves. That is, here we touch on a central point, a key point about hyperstimuli. One of the biggest sources of hyperstimuli you find in society today is your cell phone. Social media was engineered to hijack your reward system to produce this constant motivation, this constant desire in you. Desire to stay there, like a zombie dragging the screen, seeing the lives of people who make no difference in your life. Messages, notifications, news. Here's an important point about the human brain's reward system. It loves novelty, especially if this novelty doesn't force you to spend energy. The cell phone is the cradle of constant novelty, and it's no wonder you almost have withdrawal when you're away from your cell phone. All this doesn't cost energy. That's the point. You just need to drag the cell phone screen, and that's it. There's novelty there. There comes the desire to consume all that. It's very different from the novelty of going to the gym, for example, which requires you to get up from the couch and go spend energy and feel that discomfort. Cell phone novelties are easy, quick, instant, pleasant, and don't cost you any energy. Exactly for this reason. The cell phone is a great cradle of hyperstimulation and constant stimulation of your brain's reward system. To give you an idea, young people from 4 to 18 years old spend, on average, recent research, 74 minutes per day here on YouTube and 82 minutes on that other network whose name reminds of Chip and Dale. Look at that. Children and adolescents today spend more time on social media, these networks, than on Netflix, for example. I guarantee you these numbers will only increase as the years go by. And if you still haven't understood the relationship of all this with procrastination, then let me explain to you now. Straight talk, straight to the point. The corticome's dopaminergic system is responsible for you having the energy, the drive to do things, to chase after your objectives and goals. This system is being bombarded by hyperstimuli coming from all sides: processed foods, cell phone apps, Netflix series and films, enormous doses of caffeine, and also other substances. And, in general, this system is being constantly hyperstimulated. In the day-to-day of the current world, this constant stimulation and constant hyperstimulation are making your brain self-regulate in the different ways I explained to you here in the video. And the result of this is that your reward system, including your dopaminergic system, is desensitized. That is, it's insensitive to healthy and natural stimuli. And the result of this is procrastination. Studying, working, chasing after your life projects, going to the gym, eating healthy food, anyway. Overcoming procrastination becomes very difficult, almost impossible for some people, because all this requires you to spend energy and feel a certain discomfort that's natural from these things. But your brain is adapted to the current world. That is, your brain is adapted to intense and constant stimulation coming from other sources, other stimuli. And these stimuli are intense, quick, easy, and pleasant. Much more intense, quick, easy, and pleasant than anything else. Much more than doing what needs to be done to overcome your procrastination. And that's why you live there, spinning your wheels without fighting your procrastination. Because in a world that's constantly stimulating you in an easy, quick, and pleasant way, studying, working, and doing what needs to be done, getting your projects off paper, gym, eating healthy food, and so on. These things are simply boring to your brain. They're boring compared to the superficial stimuli that bombard you every day. And it's precisely here that I can tell you the cure for procrastination. You're watching Netflix while you should be studying, scrolling Instagram while you should be working, eating junk while you should be at the gym. If this is you, then you're being controlled by the hyperstimuli of the modern era. And today, I'm going to teach you how to break this cycle and become a productivity machine. Look at the reality. Our mind has been hijacked. Social media was designed to be addictive. Processed foods were created so you can't stop eating. Games, series, short videos, everything was developed by neuroscientists and psychologists to capture your attention and never let go. The result? Your brain now only wants intense and immediate stimuli. Reading a book, boring. Exercising, too difficult. Studying, your brain rejects it immediately. You've become a dopamine addict. And like any addict, you procrastinate everything that really matters in your life. But here's the good news. I'm going to give you a simple and scientific formula to reset your brain and become a machine. There are 4 steps. Step 1, dopamine detox. 2, 4 for 8 hours. First thing, you're going to do a dopamine fast for at least 24 hours. No social media, YouTube, Netflix, games, music, tasty food, or anything that gives you easy pleasure. Will it be difficult? Yes, your brain will beg for stimulation. But that's exactly what will reset your brain chemistry. Step 2, the 2-minute RO after the detox. You implement the 2-minute rule. Any task you're procrastinating on, commit to doing it for just 2 minutes. Want to study? 2 minutes. Want to exercise? 2 minutes. Want to organize the house? 2 minutes. The secret is that starting is always the hardest part. Once you start, momentum carries you. Step 3. High friction and low friction. ENVRON. T-scan figure your environment to make good things easy and bad things difficult. Want to stop procrastinating on your phone? Leave it in another room. Want to study more? Leave books open on the table. Want to work out? Sleep in workout clothes. Remove friction from things you want to do. Add friction to things you want to avoid. Step 4. Progressive reward. SYSTM. Create a system where you only gain access to pleasures after completing important tasks. Netflix only after 2 hours of studying. Social media only after working out. Tasty food only on weekends. You're reprogramming your brain to associate work with reward. Now, how to implement this in practice. Week 1. Do the dopamine detox every day for 2 hours. Choose the 2 most productive hours of your day. Week 2. Add the 2-minute rule for 3 tasks you procrastinate on most. Week 3. Configure your environment. Remove temptations. Add facilitators. Week 4. Implement the reward system. Be rigorous with this. The result? In 30 days, you'll be operating at a completely different level. Tasks that seemed impossible before will flow naturally. If this video made sense to you, leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel for more high-performance content. And tell me in the comments, what's the task you procrastinate on most? I'll respond to everyone. Remember, you have 2 options. Continue being controlled by algorithms and hyperstimuli, or take control of your mind and become a machine. The choice is yours. See you in the next video.